The first thing that we're going to do here is come right here to the component that is triggering the suspending, and we're going to use React use transition. Now this is going to give us back two items. The first is a function called start transition, and the second is a boolean called isPending. IsPending is going to be set to true while we're waiting for this asynchronous thing to finish. And start transition allows us to say what interactions should trigger this isPending to be set to true if that results in a suspending component. But we want to configure how long isPending should be true before React just goes ahead and reverts to the fallback component. And so that's where our suspense config comes in. So I'm going to come up here and make a suspense config variable, and this is simply going to have a timeout milliseconds of 4,000. So this is going to be 4 seconds that we show the isPending state before React falls back to the fallback state. And with that all set up, let's pass in this suspense config. And then let's say that this state update should trigger this isPending to go to true. So I'm going to say start transition. This is going to accept a callback. And then I'm going to trigger the state update inside of that callback. And then we'll add start transition inside of the dependency list there. And now we're in a good place. So I'm going to go ahead and console log the isPending right here so we can take a look at what happens here. So I'm going to go to my console, and here we have our isPending right there. It initializes to false. And now if I click on Pikachu, then we're going to get an isPending is false just from that re-render of updating the Pokemon name. And then we start the transition and update the Pokemon resource. And so isPending is now true. When that Pokemon resource resolves, then React will re-render so that isPending is now false. And if we go to Charizard now, it starts out as false because we updated the Pokemon name. Then it's pending because we started that. And then it's no longer pending because Charizard loaded. So with that information now, we can use this isPending variable to apply some styles to indicate to the user that, hey, something is happening. Now, before I do that, I actually want to take a look at what things look like for the user. So we see that loading state for this first one. We'll talk about that in a second. But for the second one, this is just going to hang out until Charizard is ready. Mew is also just going to hang out. We don't see that loading state. So the thing that the start transition is going to do for us in this use transition is that it says, hey, React, just chill. Don't do anything with this fallback. I'm going to be doing my own UI for that loading or this pending state. And if it does happen to take longer than my timeout milliseconds for my suspense config, then yeah, sure, you can go ahead and show a loading state. And we can actually take a look at what that looks like if we switch this delay up to be 5 seconds. And then we're going to sit around here for 5 seconds while we're waiting for Pikachu to load. And then I'll go to Charizard. And you'll see we're just hanging out here with Pikachu for 4 seconds. And then finally, for that last second, we get that loading state. So let's go ahead and switch this back and let's do something with this isPending state right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a style that's going to say opacity. And if we isPending, so if we are pending, then we'll say our opacity is 0.6. Otherwise, we'll set it to 1. And so now I can say, hey, Pikachu, and you'll notice that we get that loading state. And then we've got Charizard. This gets set to an opacity of 0.6. So we give the user an indication that, hey, you're looking at stale data, by the way. Still feel free to look at this stuff, but we are loading the thing that you requested us to load. Now, I mentioned I wanted to talk about why Pikachu immediately is showing this loading state. And of course, it's not just Pikachu if you start out with Charizard. The important thing to remember around this is that a React suspense boundary will immediately show the fallback regardless of any use transition, start transition function when it's initially mounted. So the first time it's mounted, it's going to show you that fallback regardless of any pending state. So if that's something you did not want to have happen, then we could actually move this outside of our ternary here. And if we save that, then the behavior will be a little different. You'll see that is setting the opacity like the rest of them. So that kind of depends on the user experience that you want to have here. I think I'm going to stick with this user experience right here, where you start out with some loading stuff, and then when we've already mounted this suspense component, I don't want to show that fallback until 4 seconds after this transition is started. So this gives us a lot of control over this suspending component and the UI that we're showing for that loading state. In review, what we did here was we used use transition with a suspense config that's configuring that transition to timeout after 4,000 milliseconds, meaning that this isPending variable will be true for 4,000 milliseconds, and React will wait for that time before showing this fallback UI. And the way we kick that off is we use the start transition and wrap anything that's going to trigger a suspending component inside of that start transition, so we can get a handle on this isPending for that 4 seconds to show our custom pending UI.